And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Thursday, March 6th. We have a lot to cover on the show today. Before I get into all of that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. It makes the show more lively, more entertaining between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. We appreciate you guys' viewership each and every day, so any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also, the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So we're going to start off the show. We're going to talk about a couple things regarding the Seattle Seahawks. So, with their wide receivers, actually, more specifically. DK Metcalf requested a trade, and they also released longtime wide receiver Tyler Lockett. So that's big news. That's it looks like it's going to be an end of an era in Seattle, and we'll talk about where DK could end up, where Tyler Lockett could end up. We'll get into all that. In the second part of the show, we will touch upon LeBron James getting to 50,000, and if any other player could possibly get to that and break his record, whatever it finishes at, which I think most of us will probably be in agreement on what the answer is. We'll also talk about, there was a handful of moves with defensive players. We'll talk about Max Crosby getting a new deal with the Raiders, Zach Bond re-signing with the Eagles, and we'll get into some of the other moves as well. We'll talk about what teams that made the postseason last year in baseball will miss the playoffs this year. Who has the possibility of doing that? And then in the final part of the show, I will continue my season overviews, and today we will be touching upon the Chicago Bears. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about the Seahawks and some of the changes that are coming regarding their wide receiver room. So DK Metcalf, has kind of been in the news in terms of, just trade rumors. But it was made official yesterday when he requested a trade. And he will be going elsewhere at some point. It's definitely different than, what's going on with Cleveland and Myles Garrett, because Cleveland does not want to trade Myles Garrett, but the Seahawks will trade DK Metcalf. And there's plenty of teams out there that need wide receivers. I mean, how many times am I going to say it? DK has been a productive receiver in this league for a long time. And, I think a change of scenery will do well for him. He's coming off of a year where he really didn't get into the end zone that much. And Geno Smith has done a good job as the quarterback, but I think DK Metcalf wants an upgrade there as well. And looking at, his statistics from last year, 66 receptions on the season. He just missed 1,000 yards, but he only had 5 touchdowns. And you go back to his previous seasons, he had 7 touchdowns his rookie season, 10 touchdowns in 2020, 12 in 2021. But then he had 6 in 2022, 8 in 2023, and then 5, like I said. And he's had 1,000 yards in half of his seasons. His best season, it was between 2020 and 2021. He had 1,300 yards in 2020. Like I said, with 10 touchdowns, he had 83 receptions. In 2022, he had 90 receptions. This is Geno's, first full year being the starter for the Seahawks. But there's going to be teams lining up to get DK Metcalf. And, right now, he is, I think he's 27, I want to say. So, and he's a big target. And, you hear the Chargers, they're a team that's, looking for wide receivers. And, the Packers, I know that there's been trade rumors regarding them. Yeah, so DK is 27 years old. But I think he would want to go. I would imagine he wants to go to a contender, but maybe he has no say in it. I think, the Raiders could be a possibility because of Pete Carroll. I think when you look at both of these guys, you think of Pete Carroll and the Raiders. And the Raiders' need for wide receivers. I think Tyler Lockett, if he wants to continue playing, maybe the Raiders could bring him in on a cheap deal. But yeah, that's one big need for the Raiders right now is wide receiver. And we'll get to them in a little bit. And then looking at Tyler Lockett, he's on the older side. He's in his 30s right now. And, DK Metcalf is more football ahead of him. But yeah, Lockett's coming off of a year where he had 600 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. And, they had some good years in Seattle. But, now we're entering a new era with, Mike McDonald as the head coach. And they want to go in a different direction. So, yeah, Lockett is 32. And, yeah, even when looking on the Sleeper app, it says that, he could go to Vegas and reunite with Pete Carroll. Because Pete Carroll is definitely going to want to bring in guys, to help change the culture. And Tyler Lockett's best season, he had a good stretch from 2019 to 2022. 8 touchdowns in 2019, 10 in 2020, 8 in 2021, 9 in 2022. He also had 10 in 2018. He had 965 yards receiving because he really became that top option. And he's been durable for most of his career. In the beginning of part of his career, that was when he was still kind of, new to everything. He was a young player, and, they had other options. He was kind of the special teams guy. But he's been durable in his career. He really has not missed any games. But that's also because of how he plays the game, and he'll make a catch, he'll fall to the ground. He won't take hits. So, I think he'd be a good veteran presence if, the Raiders were to bring him in. So, yeah, no, but now this kind of paves the way for Jackson Smith-Njigba to be the guy in Seattle. And he's coming off of his best season. And he, now we're going to get to see what he does as a number 1 wide receiver. I'm curious to see what ends up happening with the quarterback position. How are they going to approach this draft? Are they going to draft a quarterback? I think you'd have to guess they would at some point. Maybe they trade up in the draft. Maybe there's somebody they like that they trade up and get. Because Geno Smith is not the answer. He's not the long-term answer. And Geno's done fine, like I said before, but they need to find their franchise quarterback. And this is big news. So we'll see what happens. Again, there's plenty of teams out there that need receivers. And who knows, maybe they both go to Vegas, they bring Russell Wilson in, and then all of a sudden you got the Seahawks, the Las Vegas edition. That's what everybody's going to say. When you see that, there's Seahawks players that are available, you're automatically going to think that they're going to go to where Pete Carroll is. They're going to go to Vegas. But it makes sense. The Raiders have a need at quarterback, and they have a need at wide receiver. And, you got Russell Wilson available. You got Tyler Lockett now available. DK Metcalf requested a trade. So who knows? Maybe they all reunite in Vegas. Maybe they get Bobby Wagner from Washington. He comes over to Vegas. And then you go from there. But we will see what happens. But there were a lot of moves yesterday, and we'll get into them later in the show with contracts and players got released. So, next week, that's when everything gets crazy with free agency. So, also other receiver news, Christian Kirk got released as well from the Jaguars. So, he's available, and we'll see where he could potentially end up. Maybe he goes back to the Cardinals. We'll see. But let me know what you guys think, though, about DK Metcalf requesting a trade and Tyler Lockett being released. Where do you think they potentially end up? Let me know in the comments. Curious to see where DK ends up. That's another big name wide receiver on the market, on the trade market at least. You got him, T. Higgins, if he eventually, maybe he doesn't work out a long-term deal and he could be dealt. Devontae Adams is available. Chris Godwin's available. There's some big names out there. And we're going to see a shift in receivers. We just saw Deebo Samuel get moved. And it was only for a 5th-round pick. I would imagine for DK Metcalf, who's 27, you're going to see better compensation coming back to the Seahawks in a DK trade. But we'll see what happens. We will find out in the coming weeks. But we are going to take our first break now. And then when we come back, we will talk about LeBron James getting to 50,000 points the other night. And we'll talk about whether or not a player could ever break his record. And, we'll get into, the active players, who's the next closest to 50,000. We'll take a look at all that when we come back from our next break. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast.